How do you feel about forgiveness? Chances are you have some mixed feelings about it because it's not so bad when it's given to you, but it's not the best thing when it's required from you. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today is the subject of forgiveness. And my message is stop forgiving and stop requiring forgiveness from others. And usually we look at forgiveness as a positive thing. It's something that aids us in our relationships. But that is just surface level because when you get down to really looking into forgiveness, there's actually a lot of issues associated with it being in our reality. So I just want to start off by saying, have you ever forgiven somebody else? Or have you ever wanted or desired to be forgiven by somebody? And if your answer is anything other than yes to that question, then I definitely need to talk to you because I need to know how it is you got this far in your life without forgiveness being a presence in your life. I'm pretty sure everybody listening can relate to giving forgiveness and receiving it from others. But really, can you even imagine what that life would be like? A life without forgiveness? And if you're looking at it from a victim kind of standpoint, then that life might not look so good because you would think, well, people are just going to do me wrong over and over again and never apologize or give me the opportunity to forgive them. But what about the other side? What if there was no need for you to ever forgive anybody else? What if, even if something happened and you did something to somebody that you would deem wrong, what if they didn't need you to apologize? They were just understanding, or it didn't bother them. Now, that may seem far-fetched, and in our society, the way it is right now, it kind of is. But with some small changes in how we look at things and some practices that we can incorporate into how we interact with other people, it's quite possible that we could just exclude forgiveness from our reality altogether. So that's the basis for the foundation of the discussion today. I'm going to talk about the flawed premise of wrong and the difference between right and wrong and how it is that we come to know that in childhood, which is really where we first learn about forgiveness and the difference between what is right and what is wrong. I'm going to talk about who's really at fault when something comes up that kind of prompts forgiveness. I'm also going to talk about conflict, which is ultimately what leads to that need for forgiveness, and how that has a basis in condemnation. And that's going to include a conversation around the Bible and just condemning in general. Then I'm going to finish the episode by talking about how you can stop this act of forgiveness and how it will make your life better than it is now. Ultimately, forgiveness is a band-aid to what really could be happening in how we interact with other people. And I'm going to offer you some insight into this and some practices that will allow you to experience life without the need for forgiveness. It would change everything, everything. First, I want to talk about what prompted this discussion, because you know that I usually get some kind of stimulus, which allows me to start thinking on a topic, and then it turns into an episode. Well, what happened this time around was I received a text message from a very good friend of mine. This is somebody that I have been friends with for a very long time. And numbers aren't really my thing, but I would say, let's see, it has to be close to 20 years. Uh, We've been friends for probably close to 20 years. And it's not like the kind of hang out every day kind of friend, but it's the kind of we've seen each other go through a lot of things and been there in those moments kind of friend. Well, the text message, we haven't really been interacting a whole lot in quite a bit of time. I mean, we're talking maybe a small message here or there, but kind of like big amounts of time in between real interactions or spending time together. And I received this text, which came out of the blue for me, and he is apologizing to me and apologizing for being a horrible friend and explaining kind of his position and what's been going on in his life, which has led to what he has perceived as a disconnect with me, but also shoring up how much he cares about me and our friendship at the same time. And I'm not going to read you the text from him because I want to protect his identity, but I will tell you what my response was. So I said, quote, "From my perspective, there is nothing to forgive, but then I can't forgive what I don't condemn. We all are on our own life journey, and I respect that we have an ever-changing path that intersects and diverges at different times. I have felt the vibrational variance between us, but I was confident that we would match up again with divine timing. I hope you are finding a way to focus on the positives around you and ignore the negatives. I love you too, always, no matter what." Unquote. To which I did not receive a response. And it didn't bother me. None of this really bothered me. But I'm coming to find out that a lot of things don't really bother me that maybe used to bother me or that bother other people. But it really kind of just got me thinking about this whole thing around forgiveness and apologizing. First, I have to share something that a lot of people don't like to accept, but it is something that I accept as true. And whether you agree with me or not is okay, either way. What I understand to be true as far as universal law is that we can never do anything wrong. And that's why life is eternal. I kind of think of it like a video game. Now, when you're playing a video game with somebody, let's call it a fighting game, some kind of fighting game, and you're playing with your friend, you both have your controllers, you're both looking at the same screen, you have your own characters that you're playing, and you're fighting each other on the game. Now, one of you is going to kill the other one, but it's really not that big of a deal, right? Because after you die, you get an opportunity to play again. And that's how I think about life. When life is eternal, you realize that there really is no death. There is only transitioning. You transition back into non-physical, at which time you can choose to transition back into physical. And this is just an everlasting cycle. That's what eternal life is. So when you look at it from that standpoint, there really is nothing that you can do that is wrong. But as a human, we look at that a little differently, don't we? Because our feelings are very real, and a lot of times we feel like we have been wronged. We really learn, well, we really are trained to know the difference between right and wrong early on in life, in our childhood. And it usually goes something like this. Somebody gets upset because of the behavior of someone else. Now, because that person is upset, the other person who behaved in whatever way is now expected to take responsibility for that negative emotion. And in turn, they are supposed to apologize for that negative emotion and give the other person the opportunity to forgive them. Now, who has the power in that situation? Ultimately, it feels like the victim has the power. The person who feels wronged is now passing on responsibility to the other person, and then that person is accepting it, offering an apology, which is admittance of, yes, I did something wrong, and now sits and waits to see if they're forgiven. And ultimately, they are in this position of submission, while the other person, the victim originally, can either forgive them or not. But ultimately, that person is not empowered. That person is giving their power away by allowing someone else the responsibility of their own emotions. The truth is, all of us have a responsibility for our own emotions. That is something that we can control. When you know what your emotions mean and how to move them into a positive direction. The negative emotion is happening because that person is looking at things differently than their inner being is. It really has nothing to do with the stimulus which led to that. That was just the contrast. That was just the experience which led to the pulling away from source, which that person experienced. Now, they have a responsibility to address the negative emotion and bring themselves back up into a positive feeling. But that's not how we do it, is it? That's not how we do it at all. Because, and I'll talk about my own kids, and I'm guilty of this. You guys, I have been in this trap, and I want to turn it around because now I see it for how I really think it is. But even with my kids, so my 4-year-old starts crying, I automatically look to my 6-year-old and I'm like, well, what did you do? Right? As a parent who hasn't done that. When ultimately, my 4-year-old knows if I behave in this way and I get my parent to intervene and come into the problem, I know I can get my brother in trouble. And he's going to have to take responsibility for the way I feel. But that isn't really helpful because now my 4-year-old does not know how to move his own emotions unconditionally. His emotions are negative, and he doesn't know how to move them into a positive direction without changing the conditions that surround the experience. Now that is true power. That is where all of our power resides. But it's not how we're raised, and it's not how we're trained to deal with our emotions. So, where does this come from? Well, besides being trained by adults to take the responsibility for other people's negative emotions instead of our own, there is some stuff that we're doing that is contributing to the problem. And it has something to do with expectations, judgments, and condemnation. We have a tendency to develop expectations in others. And a lot of times, these expectations stem from how we know we would behave in a similar situation. So we say things like, well, you did this to me, but I would never do that to you. Right? It's the golden rule. You're treating me in a way that I would never treat you. Well, that's an expectation. You expect others to behave in the same way you do. And that just comes down to the whole live and let live thing. which most of us are not doing. Because just because you would respond in a certain way does not mean that everybody responds in that way. And that goes back to the whole defining what is right and wrong. Because everybody feels like the way they do things is the right way. And it is for that person. But we don't get to project the way we are onto everybody else. Otherwise, there would be no variety. How boring would it be if everybody was the same? We like this variety. We like interacting with people that are different than we are. Well, that means respecting that other people are going to respond to the same stimulus in different ways. So when we say, I would never do that to you, and we're condemning that person at that moment, right? We're saying, whoa, the way you responded to me, that was awful. I would never do that to you. You throw that guilt at them, right? I'm a better person than you because I would do it this way. I would never hurt you in that way. It's an expectation. Actually, it's all of them. It's an expectation you have based on your expectations of yourself. It's a judgment of how they responded, which is different than how you would. And it's a condemnation because you're throwing on that guilt, like condemning them for behaving in a way that's different than how you would behave. So going back to that scenario with my friend. Now, the reason he felt compelled to apologize to me was because he has an expectation of what quality friendship is like. He expects good friends to be a certain way, and he holds himself to that standard, right? Now, he believes if I'm being a good friend, this is the way that I am interacting with them. And he felt like his behavior was not meeting his own standard. He wasn't meeting his own expectation in his behavior being a good friend. The apology that was given to me unnecessarily, I might add, was solely because of that expectation he has for his own behavior. It did not stem from me asking for an apology or desiring one, which is why I responded in the way that I did. That I cannot forgive something I don't condemn. There's no need for forgiveness here. Which just goes to show that my expectations and beliefs about quality friendship differ from his. And I've known that for some time because I've been on the other end of that, where he has given me a hard time for not being what he considers to be a good friend over the years. You know, he says things like, you never call, you never write. He gives me a hard time for my lack of communication because he has an expectation about that. He feels like if we are good friends, we're talking more often. And that is different from my views of friendship. And reciprocation is kind of a big deal in a relationship. And most of our relationships, we're kind of looking for that, aren't we? We're treating someone in a certain way, and we really are wanting that kind of reciprocal response because we are treating someone out of love in a certain way, and we want to receive love back in that same way. But me and my friend, we have a difference in how we present ourselves as being a good friend. And our friendship undeniably has lasted the test of time. You know, my difference and his difference, we've found a way to make it work. But I feel like I have to give a little bit of insight into what my views are for myself in a friendship. This friend I'm talking about, he's not the only one that I've experienced this with. I can think of at least one other who also has given me a hard time for being kind of distant. But it's really not that I'm distant. I am actually this may come as a bit of a surprise, but I'm really more of an introvert. And you wouldn't expect somebody to have a podcast who's introverted, but I am. I'm more introverted than extroverted most of the time. And the way that I describe myself as a friend is, you know how there's fair weather friends? Those are those people that they're only there when times are easy and fun, and when things get really rough in your life, they kind of go the other way because they don't know how to deal with it or whatever their reason is. Well, I'm kind of the other way around. I'm the stormy weather friend. So when I know that something is going poorly for you in your life, that's when you really see me step into my role to be there for you. That is when I take my opportunity to be that person for you that's there for you in whatever way you need in order to help you to get through this experience. Because that's just who I am. And that was my role as a therapist. Like, I really show up for people at those times where they really need somebody. That's just what I do. And I'm not saying it's the way that everybody should be. I don't think it is. And I'm also not saying that it's always super healthy to be that. It's not. Sometimes that creates a problem of dependence. And that's something that has kind of been a thread in my life, that I have this codependence kind of attraction with people because I want that deep connection, right? I want that intimacy. I want we've got this. We have this connection that is so much deeper than the connection I have with anybody else. And I like to be the source of that deepness. And that's what I do. When people are having a hard time, I'm there. And I have to add that that definitely cemented my relationship with this friend because he went through some really tough times and I was the constant. I was the one who was there. And he brings that up and he tells me that, and it meant a lot to him. So then when things are going really good, I'm kind of just not around. I mean, I'm there. I'm like, hey, I still love you and I miss you. And, just kind of short, lighthearted messages just to let you know, like, I'm thinking about you. And we have that, but it's those other times that really defines our friendship. And I don't have a lot of friends. I'm not like my husband. My husband has a lot of friends. And at any given moment, he could call probably 10 people. They would be there for him, no questions asked. My friends are few, but I put myself into that relationship. And I can't speak for anybody, but I would hope that the way that my friends feel about our relationship is that it's quality. That they know that I really care about them, because I do. I really do. But it doesn't always have to be somebody I have a deep, meaningful relationship with. I think that I just feel really connected and feel like I can help when people are in need. This is all of this. This is just me kind of working through some of my stuff right now because I don't have any notes about this. But the other day, my husband was like, "Oh my gosh, you know that person that we met on our honeymoon?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, her grandson, who's only 4 years old, just drowned." And I almost felt the emotion again, like overwhelm me just now. I got overwhelmed with emotion when he told me, and I instantly wanted to call her. Like, I have not spoken to this person since our honeymoon. 7, almost 8 years ago? But I felt like, oh my gosh, that is huge in somebody's life. I need to be there for this person. I don't know what else to say about that. It really told me a lot about how I do show up for people. And that probably would have been super weird for her, right? She would have been like, what? Why are you calling me? Like, we don't have a relationship. We don't. Actually, I tried to look her up on Facebook, and I'm not even a friend on Facebook anymore. She still has my husband, but not me. And that actually made it a little easier for me. Like, okay, she set that boundary, and I would definitely be overstepping that boundary should I try to reach out to her. Setting expectations for others is a super dangerous move. The reason being that it completely gives your power away. When you have an expectation for somebody else to behave in a certain way, that means that your happiness now is contingent upon their behavior. That is a conditional love. You need these conditions to match up so that you can be happy and then you love that person. Now, just consider for a moment how different your life would be if you had zero expectations in people. I mean, feelings of freedom come to mind. Empowerment, lightheartedness, ease, non-judgment, pure salvation. When you expect nothing, there's nothing to judge. When there's nothing to judge, you cannot be wronged. So let's talk about the Bible and judgment a little bit. I feel like it's one of the more popular Bible teachings that people pull from when they say, well, if you're trying to be a Christian, then you don't judge others, right? The Bible kind of pushes for do not judge others. And usually people bring this up when they are the focus of being judged. And they don't like that. The reason they don't like it is because they know in their heart that they really didn't do anything wrong or didn't mean to. Usually people have good intentions. Most people do. Now, these people that are saying this, like, whoa, yeah, okay, I understand that you're upset, but we're not supposed to judge others. Chances are they've done it too, right? Now they're being judged, so they're kind of pushing the whole Bible out in the open here in their defense. But they've done it too. And we determined that at the beginning of this episode. Because if you have ever given forgiveness to others or requested forgiveness from others, then that means that you have judged others and yourself. There's been judgment there. There's always judgment with forgiveness. The moment you're in a position of determining wrongness towards others or yourself, now you've picked up your gavel and assumed the role of your honor. Ironic, isn't it? Considering there really is no honor in passing judgment at all. But now you've taken on the role of judge. With judgment, there comes conflict. And in every conflict, there are condemning views. You did this to me. Oh yeah, well, you did that to me, right? That's what we do. We're in this conflict. We're arguing. How dare you do that to me? You did this thing to me. You wronged me. Oh yeah, well, you responded in this way, and that didn't make me feel good. Now we're just condemning each other back and forth. Well, here's a newsflash. Condemnation, which is discussed at length in the Bible, is as far from godliness as you can really get. Condemnation is an isolated human attribute. God does not condemn. Humans do. Life could not be eternal if God condemned. And that's where we get wrong about heaven and hell, which I really can't get into in this episode. But God is not judge. God does not condemn. Therefore, there's no sorting between the good and the bad. There is only eternal life. Those of you who know what alignment feels like, you understand what I'm saying. Because when you are in alignment with your higher self, it is literally impossible to pass negative judgment on others. You can't do it. You feel too good. And when you feel good, You cannot look at something negatively. Condemning someone else is the ultimate negative judgment. And it can only happen in misalignment. Now, the Bible has some beautiful, wonderful information in it. The wisdom from source, it's there. Okay? I'm not saying it isn't. It is. There is so much to gain from the Bible. But the Bible also has its fair share of human influence in it, which is a lot of times in direct opposition to true godliness. You know the difference. You know which is which based on how you feel when you're reading about it. But so many people don't do this. They just take it for truth, take it at its word, right? Even if they don't feel good about the information. It's more disempowerment. The way to truth is through how you feel. Feel your way. That will tell you. Can you feel good while thinking about condemning someone else? No, it's literally impossible. And you can argue with me, but hear me out. You may think it feels good, especially if you're thinking about condemning somebody who has done something to you that you deem unjust. The truth is that feeling that you are thinking is a good feeling is probably just validation of the negative feeling. And it probably is showing up in ways like resentment or revenge. And those are not positive emotions. Those are negative emotions. It just feels like it's a good feeling because it aligns with your negative views. It aligns with your negative beliefs and expectations. And that to you feels justified. But ultimately, it's not a positive emotion. Just try it. Can you feel joy, happiness, love while thinking of condemning someone? You can't do it. You can't. It is impossible. Now, those are the feelings that let you know you're in alignment with Source. The only way that you can feel things like revenge, resentment, anger, rage, condemning someone, is because of misalignment. You have to drop down from grace in order to experience those emotions. Source, God, does not condemn anyone. Alignment with God, while considering condemning someone, just doesn't exist. It doesn't. And that's how you know how God feels about it. So let's get into it now. How can you stop forgiveness in your life? First, expect nothing from anybody. Well, let me change that. Expect nothing in the behaviors of anybody. There's nothing to judge or condemn how they respond or behave if you don't have an expectation to compare it to. With that said, some expectation is okay. Now, if you know you're going to be interacting with somebody, you can expect emotion. You can expect to feel a certain way before interacting with that person. That is setting an intention. Expect a positive emotion, obviously. That's what you want to shoot for, right? You don't want to feel bad. So if you can expect to feel good around that person, that's an expectation that is serving you and the relationship. But when you expect behaviors from other people, now you've fallen into the trap. You've given away your power, and you've given them the opportunity to take control of your emotions. Reach for understanding. Understanding negates forgiveness. If you can understand where somebody is coming from, there's no need for forgiveness because you get it. You're like, oh, I understand where you're coming from. right there. There's no need for an apology or forgiveness or anything. You get it. So reach for that. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Stop apologizing. Now, this one is hard for me. I feel like saying I'm sorry is deeply ingrained in me for the littlest of things, right? And then a lot of times I'm let down. Let's just say I'm in the grocery store and somebody zooms past me with their shopping cart. And for some reason, I apologize just because we had this interaction, which was not a pleasant one. And it wasn't my fault. It was the behavior of the other person who was at fault, in my opinion. And yet I apologize and I say, oh, I'm sorry. Or, excuse me. And they go, oh, gosh. That one's hard for me. I'm like, wait a minute. I just apologized, but I didn't do anything wrong. And you couldn't even just throw me a, oh, I'm sorry too? Couldn't apologize back? But really, it's not about them, is it? It's about me. It's about me and how I feel. And could I just let that roll off my back? They did. They were better at it than I was. Yeah. But the reason I'm saying stop apologizing, for one, it gives power to others, right? And they are now believing that you're responsible for their emotions, their negative emotions. That's not true. So it's just inaccurate. But also, specifically, saying I'm sorry to the universe, which is all inclusive, is putting you in a position to live more experiences for you to be sorry. I am statements are powerful statements. You are now defining who you are to the universe. And the universe says, okay, yes, I hear you. I see you. Here's more for you. Because you're telling me this is who you are. You say, I am sorry. Here's some more opportunities to be sorry. So if you want to stop forgiveness in your life, you got to stop apologizing. Stop saying I'm sorry. And ultimately, the number one thing that you have to do to stop forgiveness in your life is to prioritize your feelings. The way you feel should be number one on your list. When your happiness depends on the cooperation of others, you're creating by default. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. Take back your power. Experience life the way you intended as a deliberate creator. No need for apologizing and no need for forgiveness. If you like being able to watch the podcast, make sure to let me know by subscribing to this channel.